Good morning, everybody. I'm Ellen Kamke from the Poynter Institute. I'm also pulling together the Storify throughout the day, so thanks for the great tweets so far. I'll be adding those to be able to synthesize our takeaways throughout the day. And we have a great session. Kelly had alluded to ethics and data and the craft of storytelling, and that's exactly what we're going to be getting into in this session. We have a great set of panelists. We're going to be talking about how data shapes both our news decisions from a strategic perspective, from a craft and storytelling perspective, and also from a technological perspective. So we have a lot of folks who are living and breathing data from various perspectives within their organizations, and they're going to be able to share some specific examples and also some of their observations and takeaways on how they see data being used to shape news decisions and the ethical challenges involved with that. We're hoping to take some of your questions, both from social media and from here in the audience. And what we'll do is I'll introduce the speakers, give them a chance to share some thoughts, and then I'll have some questions and then get some questions from you all as well. So right here, we have Chris Quinn, who is the Vice President of Content for the Northeast Ohio Media Group. Good morning. Then sitting next to him, we have Jennifer Smith Richards, who is a data reporter at the Columbus Dispatch. Thanks for coming from Columbus. And then the other Jennifer on the panel came a little bit farther. She came all the way from California. Jennifer LaFleur is the senior editor for data at the Center for Investigative Reporting, and she was also recently at ProPublica as well. And then at the very end, last but not least, is Jeremy Gilbert, one of my former colleagues at Poynter, and he is now at the Washington Post, where he oversees some of the strategic decisions they make about news gathering and data. So great to have you all here today, and I thought it would be really good to give them a chance to share some of their ideas to start off with. So Jeremy, would you mind starting us off?
Not at all. Oops, some slight technical difficulties. Well, I wanted to talk about 4 quick things. Ooh, why don't you flip to the next slide, if you will? Yes, please. So I wanted to start, obviously the Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, but even more than specifically because the Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, we've learned some really important lessons from Amazon. And I think all of you have had this moment, the moment when you order something on Amazon and something else right below it pops up and says, you really need this thing that has nothing to do with that thing. And you know it. I mean, so, whether it's floss when you bought a shirt or a shirt when you bought a new, you watched a video. It's all about the idea that, yes, you have made a trade-off. Amazon knows so much more about you than anyone else that they can give you something that you don't even know you want yet, this sort of anticipatory need. If you flip again. What we're trying to do at the Post is very similar to that. So we're making this decision. We're very consciously saying, if we're going to intrude upon your privacy, then we need to deliver you something in return that is so much better that it's worth the trade-off that you make. And so what we're trying to do is a very highly personalized experience. I'm showing you 3 different examples of how that personalization works. We have something called the Personal Post, which is all about tracking your habits as a logged-in user. So you've given us permission to watch you in that way. And then we're trying to recommend stories both based on topics that you've already looked at, but also topics that we think you might be interested in. We also have an internal recommendation system, which we call Post Recommends. Post Recommends is our way of anticipating a user's needs and saying, these are the stories we think we would match you to, but they're a little bit different because it's more based on the story you've already looked at. Then trending on social media, where we think deeply about referral path. So if you came to a story from Twitter or you came to a story from Facebook, can we give you, based on audiences in those social areas, different stories that are appropriate for you? And then our own in-house brand of exploration and customization called Trove, which spun off from the Washington Post Labs, which also has yet another way of looking at reader behavior and making recommendations. The most important thing here really is that the more we have a smaller screen space, the more you have competition in news, the more important it becomes to say we can get the one story you need to know right. That for us, the fewer links we put on a page, the faster the page loads, the more likely you are to look at one more thing. So this taking analytic information and making not many recommendations, but one recommendation or two recommendations is critical. Next slide, please. So the second thing I would say is that clickbait is always going to beat commodity news. You know this. You don't want to click on those outbrain links, but you do sometimes. You know that that catchy headline is sometimes better than the headline that you should look at, but you don't. But I would say that's not where it ends. That great narrative is going to beat clickbait. And that doesn't always happen for us, but it often happens for us. So this story about a woman who drove to pick up food stamps, well, to pick up food with food stamps in her Mercedes, is the single most trafficked story the Washington Post has ever published online. Would you flip to the next screen? It had, and this is as of a couple weeks ago, so the number is even higher. These are unique visitors. These are people, I mean, as unique as we can accurately get, who had come to this story, and they came to the story because it is a powerful narrative that they invested in emotionally. And I guess I would say we don't despair of the idea that we can tell great and powerful stories, stories that are emotionally resonant, just because we need to drive visitors to them. That almost the opposite. The richer, the more personal the narrative, the more impactful it feels, the more likely people are to come to us from social. And social is by far the biggest driver of traffic to these stories. Next slide. If you look at the traffic to this story in particular, I think it is emblematic of this bigger trend that we've seen, which is that there is some value in search engine traffic to us. There are certainly some people who, when news happens, will type in something that we want them to go to via the Washington Post. But the largest portion of traffic to these stories is coming from what we call dark social, which really means you shared it via text message, you shared it via email, or if you believe Twitter, it's always Twitter, it's just miscounted. It's what they always say. But
Jeremy, that was dark social?
Dark social, or in this graph, it's what we would also call unknown, so the orange part. The blue part is social that we know about, mostly Facebook. A chunk in a visual story would be Pinterest, some of it would be Twitter. But when you look at it, other websites, they factor in on the desktop. So Yahoo, for example, still drives lots of traffic to the post, but it only drives desktop traffic. So as we start to think about what does a sort of post-desktop world, and we are in a post-desktop world, mean, it means that social is much more important than it ever was before. Next slide, please. I would say we have for a long time underestimated the intelligence of our reporters. And this is a crime and a crisis, that we cannot believe that reporters would be so easily swayed by access to analytics that we don't give them access. We cannot believe that reporters would be so loose-lipped that if we gave them proprietary information, they would suddenly run out and share it with everyone. So what we are doing at the Post, which I think we're not alone in this, but what we're doing at the Post that I think is important to think about is we are building a wholly new content management system that puts this kind of information in the hands of our reporters, that says to our reporters that they are responsible for understanding how their stories are faring in the marketplace of ideas that Kelly was talking about, that they are responsible for creating conversations around the content that they create, and that they are responsible for thinking about how best to disseminate that information. And so that could mean writing multiple headlines and A/B testing them. It could mean reaching out in different ways to different communities. It could mean targeting specific parts of a community, that on Facebook you're able to target demographic slices or geographic slices. If a story is faring better or should fare better, we want our reporters to know that. To whatever degree we can take the information that we already have and suggest whether a story is going to be successful, it doesn't mean that we won't write the stories that aren't successful, but it does mean that we're going to have to put in extra effort to make sure that people read them. So that's really important. And then the final thing that I wanted to show is I believe strongly that we have to stop thinking about the homepage. It just doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. There's still traffic to it, but there's still traffic to it in the way that lots of people still get the print Washington Post at home, and we don't necessarily have to focus our efforts on the print product any more than we have to focus our efforts on the homepage. Almost all of our traffic is sideways. I bet if we asked all the people at this panel, to varying degrees, that traffic is coming in sideways. And if we talk about mobile, it's almost exclusively sideways. So what does that mean? It means, in part, that we have to do the things that I talked about before, that when we customize, we have to make sure that we're giving you the one link, because on mobile, you're not going to look at 7. In part, it means that we need to make sure that we're going where the readers are. It's true. Especially that's the case with mobile and visual stories. Would you click again, and we'll see if this video will play? Uh-oh. Well, I'll talk over it since you can't hear it. But when we were covering Ferguson, there were a lot of personal experiences that happened to people at the Post. One of our reporters was imprisoned, wrote a fairly powerful personal essay about that. That really resonated. We had a conversation in social because we get to social first. But we did an ongoing series of video interviews where we talked to African-American men about what's happening in their communities. And so when we went to Ferguson, one of the things we did is set up some lights on the street and interviewed people talking about the situation. And we could and did put this on Post TV, which is our in-house video stream, but we also put it on Instagram because that's where the community was visually talking about the news event in Ferguson. And so more and more we're trying to do that. We're trying to go to where our readers are already living in terms of their social graph. And so I think that's really important. And that traffic in turn comes back then to the stories that we have because, again, sideways traffic is the traffic that matters for us. Thanks.
Right. Well, so I want to go next to you, Jennifer, because what Jeremy was speaking of, giving the data to the reporters is something that you've mentioned is a really good thing as a reporter. And so I would like you to talk a little bit more about how, from a reporter's perspective, how having this analytic information helps you do your job more effectively. And you had mentioned something that I think will be really interesting to hear more about, how good journalism is clickbait. And so I'm hoping that you can talk to that point too.
Sure. So there was a time when I measured how well my stories did by how many emails I got from readers or how many phone calls, and those days are sort of over. Now we have hung in our newsroom a big flat panel TV. It's right around the corner from my desk that shows in real time how many readers are on all of our stories. And so you see exactly how many eyeballs are on it, which stories are in first place, so to speak. This has been a relatively new thing in the newsroom. What it's shown us right away is something we knew was going to happen. Like the cat video of the day is often near the top. It is. We have to accept that and embrace it. Anything with Ohio State at the top is going to do really well. But it also has taught us a lot and sort of challenged our ideas about how things were doing on the web. Sometimes it's disheartening. Frankly, there was this thing that happened where Michael Cera, you know who he is, went and visited the Longaberger basket company here in Ohio. It's a giant basket, like made fun of it online, and that stayed at the top of our web list forever. But it's been useful information for reporters, not because we're standing around seeing who's in first place or second place or how our stories are doing, but because it's helped inform how we spend our time. It's helped us mostly with workflow things. So this is an example. We recently had this great story about where serious crimes occurred in Columbus. And the reporter spent a whole lot of time mapping out by census tract. So people could go online and they could click and see what's happening in my neighborhood in terms of serious crime. It bombed online. Nobody used it. Just a truth. But people loved this, right? It is a very simple drop-down menu of school report cards. It got, I don't know how many clicks, I can't even tell you, but that's what people used. So now we know that sometimes the flashiest, fanciest, greatest online maps don't draw as much, don't draw as many eyeballs. And that helps us decide how we're going to spend our time. The other thing that having those web analytics in the newsroom has taught us is that there are things that it's okay to listen to what the analytics are telling you and spend your time on stories that matter. We do know that your day-to-day, gavel-to-gavel meeting coverage is not very exciting to readers in print or online. We've seen it now in the numbers. But I now can spend my time digging into a board. You can go on to the next one. A school board that spent $700 on matching embroidered shirts because I had the time to go through all of their financial records, see where they had traveled, and I can tell people something additional beyond the average meeting story, and it did well online. I have time to do things like, next slide please, the story that newspapers all across the country did, which is, is there military equipment in our local police forces? The answer is, of course, yes. But we were able to show people that because we had the time to spend. We knew that readers valued this because we've seen it online and we've seen the feedback in print. And to the point about good journalism being clickbait, I think we see it every day in what's popular on our little flat panel TV. It's scrolling all the time. The most interesting stories in the paper, the stories we know are good and we know are great journalism, they are clickbait. Great stories are clickbait. We have a reporter who is notoriously great clickbait. You can go to the next slide. She finds the most interesting and unusual stories. And these are real news. These are not cat videos. These are stories of our community that people do want to read. One of them is about a lady who changed her name. Her name was Diane or something, you know, average, changed her name to Sexy. It stayed at the top of our charts forever because it was an interesting, well-written story. The other story I'm showing here that did really, really well was a story about sort of a notorious Yelper who had written just an ungodly number of Yelp reviews. But it was just such interesting journalism, and it was such great insight into somebody in the community. It got clicks. And so that information for us, you know, as reporters in the newsroom, that good stories are going to do well online, in print, wherever they go, is fantastic.
Thanks, Jennifer.
That too, though.
Now, Chris, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about how analytics can help shape some of our strategic decisions, and I'm aware that you are going to be showing us some live analytics.
I'm taking the biggest risk here because I'm not sure what's going to show up on the screen. It's going to show what is trending right now in the last 5 minutes. This is a tool called Parsley that we give to every reporter, just like others here do. They've had it.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you explain what Parsley is?
Yeah, I will. They've had it for about a year, and what this will show in the last 5 minutes, the last hour, the last month, is every story on our site and how much traffic it has. And we can get very granular if we were to start clicking on these. At least it's not 10 brown stories. There are times that's what you find here. If you click on each of these, you can see where the traffic is coming from. Is it coming from the home page? Is it coming through search? Is it coming through social? And you can go deeper than that. And we're doing what the other speakers have said, is we're making the reporters responsible for getting their pieces before as many eyeballs as possible. Now, this is a risky thing because it is easy to get the cat story and the silly things to bump up your numbers, and we don't want to do that. So by showing this, I could see people thinking, okay, you're just looking for the best clickbait. So what I want to talk about with respect to this is our hyperlocal journalism in Cleveland. We're part of the Advance network of news sites, and we have a chain of 12 weekly newspapers that our website feeds. And so unlike a lot of places in the country, we still have a profitable interest in covering the hyperlocal, the small communities. So we, for years, had been doing that, and the traffic for it had been pretty anemic. A lot of what was written was features and lightweight stuff. And when we built this team a year ago to go after this and see what the future is for covering this. Is there a chance that watchdog journalism in the hyperlocal world, is it going to work? We gave them this tool. And it's been remarkable. Over the last 6 months, these folks have pretty much tripled the number of eyeballs they get on their stories, and they're not doing it with lightweight features because nobody reads those. They're holding governments accountable. They're talking about taxes. They're talking about new businesses. These are communities that really hadn't been covered for a long time, and as a result of the focus they've put into this hard news, which this shows them there's an interest for. There's a recall effort going on in one of these suburbs right now for one of the mayors because of coverage we had. There's been a whole lot of people asking more questions about some of the spending. I think that the accountability we put on the reporters to build their audience using this as a tool is a key way. We use this every day. When you post the story, reporters immediately look, how's it doing? Is it going to get in the top 10? Where's the traffic coming from? But we also use this to spot trends. You know, 10 years ago, if a plane crashed carrying 4 college students, we would have covered that as a big story. but I don't know that we would have done 17 different stories in a day. What we've learned through these tools is just how rabid an interest there is in breaking news all the time. And so we had that happen a few weeks ago. 4 Case Western Reserve students died in a plane crash overnight. And through that day, we had 17 different pieces posting, and people are coming back and coming back and coming back. I do have a little bit of a disagreement with Jeremy about the homepage. When we started into the digital space, we were mostly print people, and we thought of the homepage just like the front page of the paper. Let's just put the big stories out there, which was stupid because it's a whole new media. What we do now is we treat the homepage as another tool to help people find stories they want to see. We've done a lot of analysis of what works out there. So the top stories on our site are almost always going to be about the Browns. There's a rabid international interest. We think if we put a 30-second video of a Browns helmet online, it would do well. It's hard to understand. Reporters, if they can find any reason to put Browns into their stories, they will. But what's interesting is we put a Brown story on the homepage, and it doesn't get many page views from that homepage. But if I put a crime story on the homepage in a suburb, a bank robbery or a shooting, thousands of people will click to it from the homepage that might not have found it otherwise. And so it's been a hard thing for longtime print people to stop thinking about that homepage as the front page of our news site. It's just another tool that we use to make sure we're getting things to people. I mean, this is a very handy thing for us, and it plays regularly into how we move things around.
And we'll have some more questions about how you balance analytics. I mean, because how addictive is it? Have you not been watching these stories like flip order and move? I mean, so being able to balance these analytics with making editorial judgments, using other factors to make those editorial judgments, and we'll get into that here in a little bit here. But first, Jennifer LaFleur.
Okay, the other Jennifer, it's confusing. I was going to try to tweet one of those and see if I could move it up a little bit, but I didn't have time to do it. So if we can put that back on later, that'd be great. My name's Jennifer LaFleur. I'm a senior editor at the Center for Investigative Reporting. I have been there for a few months. Before this, worked for ProPublica, another nonprofit newsroom in New York. I can't wink at him, and I can't read this, but that's okay. So a little bit about CIR. We are the oldest nonprofit investigative newsroom in the industry. I'm not doing this to just like pump CIR, but it's a different organization that everybody doesn't always know about. We have about 75 on our staff. That's reporters who write, reporters who do radio, reporters who do TV, and producers. We produce stories for web, print, TV, radio. We recently started a radio show called Reveal Radio that is a 1-hour investigative radio program, which will be part of our mix next year. We'll be doing a weekly radio show, which is pretty cool. That radio show features work from other newsrooms as well, so it's not all CIR stories. We also do some interesting other partnerships, which was very different for me coming to CIR. We do plays about our work. We've had 2 plays based on investigations at CIR. We do graphic novels. We even have a coloring book for one project. So it's an interesting area to experiment in and see how people get information in different ways. Our other partners include CNN, most of the newspapers in California, Frontline, ABC, and Medium. We do investigations that make impact. That's the types of stories we do. And we do investigative reporting, so we don't have the fun of getting to do some of the lighter, shorter stuff all the time. Click. What? Oh, did you? Okay, sorry. I can't really read it, so that's why it's... So some of the analytics, we look at a lot of things that other people were talking about. We have an added challenge of getting traffic from our partners. Some of them are really good about it, some of them aren't. So it's not always super easy to measure on our traffic on certain projects if the majority of that project runs on another website or a TV program or things like that. For social media, it's also a huge driver for us. Facebook is by far our best driver to bring people to stories. Okay. This is a Washington Post graphic, actually, of social media traffic last year that kind of reflects what ours, oh, you can, yeah, sorry. I'm two hands, go ahead. So one thing that both ProPublica and CIR do is, and it's, you know, my area of expertise is working with databases and making that data available online to folks. So we try to do databases that, you know, readers will want to check multiple times, but not just so that they'll click on them. Both ProPublica, CIR do stories that we try to have an impact. We try to provide data that people use or that can make a difference. And so while we love it when people go back to databases, we really want them to be something that serve a purpose. You know, data sometimes changes frequently, so people will come back to it and check it multiple times. We've also done a lot of crowdsourcing projects that prompt people to participate. And some of them, particularly at ProPublica, had amazing number of people basically willing to do free work for the organization. Other tools of social media that have brought people in are some community building projects. And again, all that trying to serve a purpose and try to do journalism with impact. Okay, this is just a few examples of such interactive databases. This is a Texas Tribune database. They do a Texas salary database, which gets a lot of traffic apparently. So yeah, this isn't ours. This is probably the biggest hit database ProPublica ever put online, Dollars for Docs. This is a database that tracks payments to physicians from pharmaceutical companies. To date, it has had 8 million hits, which for an organization of 35 people is a lot. So the one thing I want to talk about on this and some of the other databases is we tried to be very, very careful in every online database we did to make sure that people understand what's there and what's not there. It's a little hard to control it. The reason we got this data is 15 pharmaceutical companies were required by law to post the payments they made to physicians. Some of our developers built some very complicated scrapers to pull that data in and make it available online. This is not every pharmaceutical company. It is the 15 that were forced under court order to make their data available. That'll change later this year when everybody has to report this data, later this month, hopefully. But we have to be very clear that that's not, you know, every company. So that's where, I think it's 15 now. At the point of this snapshot, it was 12 disclosing companies. So big companies like Purdue Pharmaceuticals that make OxyContin aren't part of this. So we need to make people aware of that. Okay. This is a similar project we did at ProPublica looking at how doctors prescribe under Medicare Part D. So you could see how your doctor compares to other doctors in your state and in their specialty. We had a lot of discussions internally, like how can we show this so people really understand what the data means. So we've hopefully built some graphics and tools into this that show people, you know, your doctor, you know, most people in this doctor specialty in this state, their #1 drug is simvastatin, which is a cholesterol drug. If it's moved up to be like an antipsychotic for somebody who's a primary care doctor, that might be a reason to then talk to them, go out and do more reporting. I actually used this database for myself when my father's physician wanted to prescribe a particular drug. I went in and I saw he had not prescribed that drug. So to me, that meant he didn't have a lot of experience with that drug. So I went back to him and said, can we talk about this? I don't see that you have a lot of experience with this drug. So it was a good talking point for me. So yeah, go ahead. And go ahead and click the next one too. Tool we had done previously was a dialysis facility tracker, and we did this because the federal government has a database of dialysis facilities that basically puts up 3 numbers that are impossible for any normal person to interpret. And so we thought it might be easier for people to see, are you more likely to die if you go to this place versus this place? More useful tools. So we made it so you could search, find a facility near you, and pick the best one for your needs. So, and we've done that with several projects. our ProPublica did that with several projects. This is a CIR project that partnered with the Tampa Bay Tribune and CNN, America's Worst Charities, looking at charities that spend the majority of their money on telemarketing. That was the key to figuring out which charities were good or not, and this got a lot of hits because people wanted to see if they were donating to some of these places. Go ahead and click the next one too. And this was one that actually has come back around because many of the schools in this database were damaged further in the Napa earthquake recently. But this was a database of school inspections and how seismically safe they were. So this was something that parents were really interested and concerned about. And this is one of the crowdsourcing, I'll go a little bit quickly here, the crowdsourcing projects we did. We wanted to track spending on ad spending on TV by political candidates, and there really wasn't good data for that. So we had people go in and do data entry for us, and there was like the top person did like thousands and thousands of data entry for us on this. And again, this is because I like to talk about data accuracy, 3 people entered every record, so 3 different people entered the same record, so we could then compare it to make sure it was right. This is a patient harm Facebook site that ProPublica keeps. It's been a huge driver of getting people talking about patient harm issues and getting them to our patient harm stories. Okay, and go ahead and skip. This is a similar one on school stuff, but I want to go on. So we have a slightly different measure when we're trying to decide what stories to do. Our major driver for news decisions is impact. Will somebody be held accountable? Can something be fixed? And so that's something that we actually at CIR now have someone who studies that, a social scientist in our newsroom who studies impact and has developing some tools for us to study impact. So we have a tool in our system that gives you, if you do a story and something happens as a result of it, you can fill in all the things that happened. And so, rather than reporters watching their story go up on a chart, they're in here like, ooh, they wrote a bill for my story. Okay, so sort of the same thing another way. So the outcomes that we're looking at are macro outcomes, so big things. The law has changed now. People are, commissions are shut down. There's meso income, the outcomes in between, which are shifts in discourse, public debate. Groups get together and have a forum on something that we were covering. And micro incomes. Individuals changed their knowledge, their attitude, their opinion. That part's a little more challenging because you don't know how people are thinking, but we do some surveys and things like that to try to assess in certain communities what the impact was of a story. So. This is one where, if you look on our website, there's actually an academic study basically on the impact of this project about rape in the fields, which was, it ran on our website, it ran with Frontline, it ran with Univision, looking at the female farm workers who are raped in the fields. And I said that really stupidly, and I'm on video. Okay, so, but as a result of that, women's advocates, law enforcement officials, there was a lot of movement, a lot of public forums to try to fix this problem. So there's a lot going on now in California to really address this issue, and a lot of it because of these stories. And a lot of it we wouldn't necessarily know if we weren't so, careful about tracking all this information and getting back in touch with people and seeing what happened. A lot of times we'll do stories, you write a story, you don't go back to anybody and find out if anything changed, you move on to the next story. And we're trying to be pretty focused about going back and finding out what happened. So we have this person in our newsroom who is developing systems to track impact for organizations, building some tools, working with others to try to figure out the best ways to categorize impact. I was just at one of these conferences in New York. There's dissection workshops all over the country looking at the impact of journalism. There's going to be one for like half a day, the day before ONA in Chicago. But they're holding them all over the country to try to help people figure out how to see if your stories have impact. So I think that's it. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to get to this question that I think is underlying a lot of the ideas that you all shared, and how do we balance the information we get from analytics with our journalistic responsibility to make sound editorial judgments for the content that we create. And I see this from a couple different perspectives, both on a story level and also from a strategic level. And I see this supporting the journalistic value of relevance. We want to tell stories that are relevant to our audiences, and that's why the analytics are really important, so we can see which stories are impacting our audience. Mark, can you pull up the Parsley analytics again? Is that okay, Chris? Yeah, sure. Okay. Because I think it's just kind of, interesting to be able to see how these stories are performing, and it also will give us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this. Chris, one thing that you've mentioned is having analytics helps us back up some assumptions we have. And can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, we have it actually disabused us of some things. I think for years in print, people thought that if they had a story on the front page, people were reading it just because it was out there. I don't think many of us think that anymore. I think people read what interests them, and if it's compelling and all of the things we've talked about. What this helps us see is what's relevant. It also helps us see if we're doing our job right. If we're not getting search traffic we think we should get, if we're not getting social media traffic we think we should get, we can go back in and diagnose and see why. I do think it has been helpful in showing us what people don't really care about. And there was a lot of rather lightweight stuff that newspapers had been doing for a lot of years that I think they've come away from. Our resources have all been shrinking, and we have kind of focused on what's important. I don't think there are many news agencies in the country that exclusively use things like this to make their decisions, because you would end up with a bunch of videos of cats. What you're trying to see is what is the news that does resonate. We're all trying to find our way and preserve journalism for the future, and to do that, you've got to have an audience, and this helps us identify that.
I guess the one thing I would add to what Chris is saying is that it's not just that we would do cat videos, because you would be a terrible business owner if you hired people as highly trained and as costly as a newsroom full of journalists are to do cat videos, because people at home are going to do cat videos for free. So you can't out cat video the cat video people. There are so many of them who work for nothing, who have nothing else to do but take videos of their cats. And, I have nothing against cats, but I think whether we call it clickbait or not, I think there is absolutely an imperative that we tell important journalistic stories, and we tell them in an engaging and compelling way. And so that means writing great headlines like Jennifer was referring to. It means watching whether the social traffic is coming into your story and then changing something like Chris was alluding to. I just think it's naive to think that we could drive tons of traffic in a way that makes sense to have a news organization if all we do are participated memes. It just wouldn't work.
Now, Jennifer, I want to come to you next, because this speaks specifically to the examples that you showed on the interactive map and the database on school records. Those are two very important stories. One really resonated with the audience, got a lot of clicks, and one didn't. How do you handle that from your perspective? Is that where you would try to use analytics to inform SEO to make stories more relevant to your audience, or how do you approach that when you pour a lot of effort into a story and it doesn't resonate with audience?
Well, in that particular example, the message was sometimes simple is better. And I think that we can take that as reporters and go, okay, what's the simplest way that I can give people access to this information? And understand that they're going to use it. We know they're going to use it with a very simple drop-down database. But about things like board meeting coverage and the lightweight stuff that newspapers always have done, as a reporter, I've been arguing for years that nobody wants to read a blow-by-blow account of what happened at a school board meeting. And often, if nothing happens, we don't write a story. But this is proof now that we don't need to write your formula meeting story. We need to be there. We need to understand what happened. But we need to devote the resources that come after that meeting to doing good watchdog journalism.
Let me give you an example of something that we did to demonstrate this. We've had the Democratic candidate for governor in the state. His campaign has melted down in the past month. He was found in a car with a woman who wasn't his wife. He didn't have a driver's license for 10 years. It led to a lot of reporting, and it pretty much collapsed over the course of about 3 weeks. So when it was over, a reporter wrote an analysis of how the campaign came apart. And it was written pretty much as a traditional print story. It was up before any of us even knew he was writing it, really. So the next day we said, and it did okay. There were people that read it, some number of thousands, but it wasn't doing as well as all of the previous stories we had done on this. So we said, let's turn this around and let's analyze this as the 6 or 7 decisions this guy made across the course of his campaign that brought this to an end. And the reporter said, well, that's very similar to what I did. And we said, yeah, not quite. Let's see. So he wrote that, put it up, and it doubled the traffic of the other and kept doing well. And he was surprised. He's a longtime reporter and likes to write thoughtful pieces. This was just as thoughtful. It was just written in a digestible fashion. And what it told him is, I can write this in a more relevant way. Most of the people, more than half of the people consuming what we produce are doing it on a 3-inch screen now. And we've got to be thinking of them as we do it.
One of the ideas that we've discussed is sideways traffic or direct traffic from social, so people coming directly to a story page rather than coming to a home page. And one of the underlying challenges I see for journalists is that this is a shift, because in the past, editors and leaders at news organizations have been the ones deciding what stories are most prominent, what stories go on page 1, what stories go on the home page. And this concept of growing sideways traffic or direct traffic from referrals or social media is the complete opposite, where the audience is deciding what stories are most prominent and what stories are most important. So how do you wrestle with that as an organization? Jeremy, how do you use this as a journalistic opportunity to use the article pages as a way to Amazon another story, or how, and what are the challenges?
I mean, I think there are 3 things here. One is that, and Chris mentioned this already, we operated under this totally false belief that we had some control over what people looked at when we put things on the front of our website or we put things on the front of our newspaper. We never actually did. I mean, that was what we put on the front of our website and our newspaper. It didn't mean anyone looked at it. So in some ways, that was never true. The second thing is, you can't imagine a social community, or you shouldn't imagine a social community, where your news organization is not a participant. So not just organizationally, but individually, if your reporters are engaging in that conversation, then you also have some say over what people are looking at. But I think, to Ellen's third and most important point, we cannot offer people the same experience. If we give everyone the same article page experience, it's just as naive as it would be to say, just because we put something on our front page, people are going to look at it. In some cases, it absolutely works. And certainly, Chris talked to one category of story that people probably don't already know about, crime stories, for example. But on those article pages, we really have to deliver a very customized experience. And it means that we will have to make some choices about how much we know about you, and whether we give you something we know you'll like, whether we give you something we anticipate you like, or whether we give you something that we know you haven't been looking at but we think you should be looking at. And I think that's where the challenge is going to lie for us, is that there will be stories that we know are really important that we also know our audience may not be as interested in. And sometimes we have to make that decision, because those are the most important things that we have to do journalistically. And so I think that's the balancing act. And it depends on your organization. People that cover general interest news, and I would include the Washington Post in that, may be a little bit different than CIR, which to some degree has other ways of getting information out. And so you may not have to balance as much the stories that people will look at when the ones you want them to look at. But it is a balancing act.
And I think that that's why this conversation is so important, is because every organization, every community's audience is different. There's not a magic bullet that will work for the Washington Post, CIR, the Dispatch, and all of the various properties within the Northeast Ohio Media Group. And I think that that's why analytics are important to help us, shape our decisions. But this is something we brought up in Kelly's session. There are also the biases of algorithms, and there are some gaps in understanding, in those algorithms. So I was wondering if we could just talk about those gaps. What's missing when we just rely on the analytics? What human factor is missing?
I think one of the things that we always risk is the assumption that just because it isn't getting traffic now doesn't mean it never could get traffic. And again, Chris's story is a good one where maybe it's that the information is right and it needs to be packaged or reshaped in another way. Maybe someone hasn't offered this compelling set of choices. I mean, if I asked you 10 years ago, would people want to watch cat videos? You probably would have said no, but people love cat videos. So somebody had to be the first to put the cat videos out there. I mean, the same may well go for different types of news, different categories of news. But I guess I also would not be so universally down on algorithms. It's not as if yet computers are writing algorithms that we have no control over. We make algorithms. We make editorial choices that we bake into an algorithm, and that algorithm surfaces information. And the best thing about it is we can keep changing it. So it's not working the way we want today, then let's modify the algorithm. If anything, I think that's the call for journalists to not necessarily be computer scientists, but at least to think like a computer scientist, to realize that you have control over what your recommendation system does. One of the things that's very interesting at the Post is we've done a product called The Most, and The Most is a series of top articles from, I think last count was 20 different news organizations, Time and a bunch of other ones. And what's fascinating is originally we said we just want most popular by visits, because that's a chunk of our secret sauce and it's in the most read column you see. But it turned out that other news organizations have totally different ways of thinking about what is popular for their audience. And I think you have to figure out what works. And the way that you figure out what works is by offering alternatives and seeing which one has resonance. And it's an iterative process, just like you're making a product. Your recommendation algorithm is an iterative process where you try something and change it, and you change it, and you change it until you get something that seems to work best.
I want to give the rest of the panelists to sound in on this if they'd like to, and I also want to start to pull in some questions from the audience if we can. Anybody want to add anything? Okay. Any questions? Okay, I see one in the back. And go ahead and state your name.
I'm Carl Eidsvog. I'm on the faculty here. And Jeremy, for you, and let me first begin by apologizing for the length of the question. I normally try to ask concise questions. This takes a few sentences. And when you talk about the importance of providing that one link, I'm curious what discussion there has been at the Post with your new ownership in providing context. And let me put that in context. You've probably read the book by Charles Lewis, 935 Lies. I don't think there's much doubt that if the New York Times and the Washington Post had done their job as journalists, we would not have had a war in Iraq. And so a quick example on context: when Bush and Cheney and everyone else were running around saying, oh, Saddam used weapons of mass destruction against his own people. Yes, he did. And everybody accurately reported that. Virtually nobody reported that, yes, when Saddam did that, the United States supported him. There was no context. And so my question is, with the ability now with hyperlinks and being able to take a look at what was done, what is the push by top management now for the Post to do a better job of context?
And tell me if I've got this right. Journalists have traditionally done a pretty good job of reporting the news as the facts that we see them at the moment that we see them. But we often do a less great job of putting those facts in the broader context of what's going on, and especially thinking about their importance relative to other events. Is that fair?
No, for the most part, we play a human microphone.
Okay, that's a sort of totally different question then. I mean, I think there are a couple of things that the Post has done specifically, and I honestly can't say whether we're doing them because we know that they resonate with our audience, or we're doing them because we think it's our journalistic duty, or hopefully that it's both. But I would say we've added 15 new content verticals, or new areas of content, in the last year, since October, really. And almost all 15 of those are analysis-based areas. So we look at the analysis of policy, we look at the analysis of actually analytics and statistics, we look at understanding what's going on in science, because to some degree we believe that just reporting what has happened is a commodity. So we're trying to differentiate ourselves from other people actually on a lot of these stories by saying, well, we will primarily, our first thought will be, how do we analyze what's happening rather than how do we just tell you in isolation what one thing was or parrot back what one official said, because we know that parroting back what an official says is not good enough and is not interesting. Now, the Post in particular plays, for our audience, two different roles. One role is a national, international role, and a second role is a local role. The local role is a little different because we feel like oftentimes we are the only ones reporting on things that happen in the DC metro area. And there are other affiliate, NPR and other, local television. But in that case, there is a lot of reporting because we're the first to tell you. But especially on national things, especially on politics, especially on policy, we think that context and analysis is perhaps the most important thing we can do because there's so many places you can hear just what happened.
Another question? We have one down here in the fourth row.
My name is Noah Castro. I'm a freshman here at Kent State University. I'm a broadcast journalism major. And one of the things that actually was pointed out to me that sort of made me perk up a bit was when I think it was Jennifer Smith Richardson.
Could you stand up, please? So that you can be seen.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks. You had spoke about the dialysis data information that you guys, that was you guys.
There's two Jennifers.
There's two Jennifers. Yeah, it's slightly confusing. When you had spoken about that dialysis information, my mother's actually a social worker at a dialysis clinic. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more upon that, and whether it was like a localized information, a statewide or a national information. But also I wanted to say to Jeremy about all the information about that and how you said about the homepage is dying. I can actually agree with you upon that because most of the information I get these days from news outlets, I'm not saying like sports teams or other things, but news outlets, it's through my social media, it's through links, through my Facebook and through my Twitter. And I wanted to thank you guys also for coming out today because it's very useful to hear information like this. So if Jennifer could elaborate a little bit more on that, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we had one reporter who's now managing editor at ProPublica, Robin Fields, who basically fought for a year to get the raw data from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services of dialysis facilities. She had some success early on getting reports from states and started to enter the data at the same time was negotiating for the national database. Dialysis is one treatment that Medicare pays for no matter who you are or what age you are or what your income is. So it's one database where there is a pure set of everybody getting that across the country. And facilities are radically different. There's two major chains that compete a lot, are buying up dialysis facilities all over the place. And there wasn't useful information on CMS's website. It's really these measures that a normal person wouldn't understand. And so we got the raw data and spent a lot of time figuring out what the variables are that most resonates with people in making a decision. And basically you could type in your address and you could find all of like the 10 dialysis facilities closer to you and their ratings on, infections, emergency room visits because there was a problem at the facility, mortality rates, things like that. So to provide people with pretty clear measures of, the quality of that place. So yeah, that's what we did.
I have time for about one more question, and I see a hand in the back, or do we have another one already?
Oh, I have to stand up, right? My name's Carrie. I'm an alumna. I just wanted to ask, I know that there's, with this increased focus on algorithms and analytics and how stories are doing socially and on the website, some news organizations are turning to measuring how each reporter does in terms of getting clicks on their stories. And for example, I read Sports Illustrated recently measured how much ad revenue each reporter brings in from getting clicks on their stories. Do you think that's going to be a trend in the future of measuring each reporter's effect on getting ad revenue and getting clicks to the website and their role in the larger organization making money that way? Do you think that's a trend?
I don't see a trend where reporters are measured based on their ad revenue. I think we're well into the trend of reporters being measured on their audience and their productivity online because we've never been able to do that before. So I mean, we sat down with all of our reporters last spring and said, this is what we'd like you to aim for. And it was remarkable once they took ownership of that they were much more attuned to making their material search engine optimized and getting it out on social media, and saw dramatic increases in the number of people and the number of unique devices that were coming to their stuff. I think we would have done this back in the print days if we had any way to do it. We just didn't. Now we do, and it's like any other business, holding employees accountable for performance.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, Jennifer, Jeremy, and Mark for driving. Just to kind of sum up some of the things that we heard during this session, we're finding ways to use the trends and information we're getting about our audience to really harness the audience potential and take a story that's trending or viral and use it as an opportunity to build relationships with people who are reading our the information that we create as journalism organizations. And it's all analytics is also helping us shape our role as reporters. It's helping us make good time management decisions and figure out where we should focus our efforts for the biggest impact on the stories that we tell our communities. And data is more than just spreadsheets. We were learning from Jennifer LaFleur, it might be a coloring book page. It might be some other sort of deeper algorithm or some sort of open data, but it's not just learning how to use Excel really well. That's part of it, but it's even more. And then we've also learned that because our audience is coming to us directly and on their own terms, we don't have to think, or we shouldn't focus our energy on getting them to come to us, but also consider how we can go to where they are engaging too. So those were all really important takeaways I know that we'll be able to build upon and reinforce throughout the sessions. And you'll get to hear from these panelists later on during the day, and I'm sure they will be around during the break as well, which brings us to the break.